Hi, this is Zach from Mercury Works, and I'm going to show you the basics of loading 65mm and 70mm film. This is a standard 70mm cassette. This is made by these were made by Kodak. It's very similar to a 135 or 35mm cassette, except that it's much more robust. It's meant to be reused any number of times, and it's extra large. The way it works is it has two caps on it, so you can remove either side, and inside is a spool. Now this is a standard 70mm spool, but with Mercury Works replacement spools, you can also shoot 65mm film and load it into the exact same type of cassette. So 65mm spool looks like this. There are several types. There's a centered variety, and there's an offset variety, and which type you use depends on what type of camera you want to load it into. For instance, if you're loading it into a Hasselblad, you use the offset type. If you're loading it into a Mercury back or large format camera, you generally use the centered type. Okay, so both of these spools load very easily into 70mm cassettes. So which type of film you're shooting basically determines which spool you roll the film onto. You can do this by hand, or you can use a bulk loader, and there's a vintage called Daylight bulk loader that I do not recommend. You load it in the dark, and then you can spool it in the light, but there's no advantage to doing that because you have to load it and unload load it in the dark anyway, and it tends to scratch your film in my experience. So what I recommend is either doing it by hand, which is laborious, or using a Mercury bulk loader, and that's what this is. This is a Mercury bulk loader. Almost all these steps need to be done in the dark, but the first step is to put this screen down in the light, is to get your adapters ready. There's a standard adapter here for these take-up spools, same for 65 and 70mm. And to load this, what you do is you just put it over the small end and snap it down onto that adapter. On the other side, it depends on what type of bulk film you're loading. Sometimes you switch this adapter out. This is a standard square adapter that you use for most 70mm films and all Mercury spooled 65mm films. But there are some alternatives, such as round for some 70mm bulk rolls that come and have a round center spool. And there's even this very large one for sometimes, very rarely, sometimes 70mm film comes in a large core, large circular core, or it comes with no core or spool at all in the case of Ilford 70mm films. In those cases you use this, so you just slip this off and add this one on. But those are rarer cases. In most cases you're going to use, and all of those come with the bulk loader, but in most cases you're going to use the square adapter for basic stuff like this. Here's a Mercury 65mm film. Now at this point you are going to turn off the lights. You need to be doing this in complete darkness. You could do this in a changing bag or in a completely dark room. To open this up, you would open up, normally you would remove the tape around the can, open up the can, remove the bulk spool, and now 70mm bulk spools of the Kodak variety and Mercury 65mm bulk spools have the exact same dimensions, so they're going to load exactly the same way in this or any other bulk loader. And basically what you do is you just pop it over the top, and this is the long side. There's a short and a long side. Short side is your take-up. Long rod here on and with also the larger base is for your bulk spool, bulk roll. So you put it on there and you drop it down until it snaps kind of into place on that adapter below. What you do then is you take a second of that same adapter, whatever type it is. If you're using this huge spoolless one, there is no top. There is no top, but for standard spools, you put in a top adapter as well, which stabilizes it and just makes the operation a little bit smoother and faster. And what you do is you just find that hole in the dark and you pop that down. So the center of it goes over the top of the metal post in there, and the rest of it goes around the edge of the square hole in the bulk roll itself, in the spool. Okay, then you would remove any tape you have here, letting your film free. And the important thing here is that the film always needs to feed off of the top, like this, the top of the spool. If for some reason it's feeding off the bottom, you've loaded your spool upside down, and you just need to flip it over so that it's feeding always off of the top edge. And it's the same here. It's going to load on the top edge of your spool. So what you do is you pull it over just like that, and if you're doing 70 millimeter, and or you have one of these metal little spring snaps, you can roll a little bit of your film and then snap the metal piece on. Just push it on the side like this and snap it in there. However, for 65 millimeter film and even some thicker 70 millimeter films, I don't really recommend using the little steel spring. You are so much safer using just a little piece of tape. Now what this means is when you finish your roll of film, there'll be a little extra resistance as the tape pulls off. So that's the disadvantage in your camera, but the advantage is that as you're loading your film, you will highly reduce or eliminate any misloading problems where the film comes loose on your take-up spool and isn't really pulling through the camera, etc. Especially with 65 millimeter film, which is very extra thick and very springy. It definitely works better if you tape it. So you just take a little piece of just standard blue painter's tape, and you just tape it on the edge of the spool like that. Next, you take this, which is the handle that comes with the Mercury bulk loader, and this slots in. It has the pattern on top of the spool. Same again, exactly the same for 70 millimeter and 65 millimeter spools, and it just slots in there like that. Now again, just to reiterate, the film needs to be coming off of this spool at the top and then onto this spool from the top. That's how you know it's all correct. It's very easy to do that in the dark. Next, you need to actually roll it onto the spool. Now, to know how much, it depends on how thick your film is and how much you want to load. One of the advantages of 65 millimeter and 70 millimeter film is that you can load as much as you want. You can do a 120 length, a 220 length, or a really, really long length if you want to shoot a huge amount. Of course, in both 65 millimeter and 70 millimeter also allows you to cut mid-roll, so you can develop at any time. You don't ever have to finish a roll. The system was designed to allow for mid-roll cutting. It's a professional system, unlike 120 film, for instance, which was designed as an amateur system. And you need to finish the roll before you can develop. With these, you don't. You can load as much as you want, and you can cut it at any point wherever you want to. Now, in the instruction manual for the Mercury bulk loader, we have a chart that lists all of the different types of film, different thicknesses, 65 millimeter, 70 millimeter, different lengths of film, and you kind of choose what length you want to load, and that determines how many turns you need on the spool. So in this case, I'm loading 65 millimeter film, and I'm going to load a 220 length to make it easy to develop in a Mercury. Mercury sells Patterson and Jobo reels of 220 length that accepts 65 millimeter film, so it makes it very easy to develop at home, or you can send it to Alchemy to have it developed. This tells me that I need 21 turns for a 220 length of 65 millimeter film. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to grab this side, and I'm also going to put a hand on this one, and I'm going to turn this a little to create tensions, right? I want tension between these when I roll it, so that I don't end up with a bad loose film on the take up side. So I'm creating a little tension, and now I'm going to spool this. I'm going to roll it 21 times. 2, 3, 4. When I've got that amount, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put my hand to hold the film here on the take-up side. And I do that so that I don't lose tension on the take-up spool. I want it to be a nice tight roll. Okay, so I just bring in scissors, and all you do is just cut straight down like that. Take off the handle, pop this out, and now it's ready to be loaded in to a 70mm cassette. Now, you have to load it in the proper way. One way to think of it is if the film is rolling into the top of this spool, you want to position the cassette so that this side here, see how this is a square and this sticks out further than the edge of the canister? That's the side, that's the direction it needs to load. Load and unload into a cassette. You do not want it loading in this side. That would be incorrect. It has to load like this. So if you want to position this, you can think of it this way. You can feel this in the dark. The lip, the square lip that comes out on a cassette should be at the top, the same side as this. All right. Once again, if I were flipped like this, the film would be coming in this way, and that's incorrect. It needs to come in this way, the direction of that lip. So that's the only thing you can really get wrong in loading a cassette. So you want it to come in like that. And all you do is drop it down in the cassette, and you got to snap it all the way down so it's just barely below the top rim of the cassette. And then you need to pinch it. All right, so you're keeping it pinched so that the film doesn't get pulled in. And then you're going to put the top on. And I do this, that's going to spin for 65mm film, sometimes for 70, but usually for 65. And it does lose tension in there, but it's not going to suck this in because I have it pinched. That's normal. That always happens, and you don't need to worry about it. But what you do need to do is get this top on here. What I do is hook the square side, the corner first, and then pop down the other side. You could do it either way. Once you snap it in place, your cassette is loaded. Technically, you could turn on the lights now for this cassette is light tight. This is a daylight loading cassette. But you need to make sure you put away, of course, your bulk roll. Put back any little tape. You should hold this with a little tiny piece of blue painter's tape. You just pop this top off, and then you can just pop this out and put it back in its can. Once that can's closed, everything's light tight. You can turn on the lights or take it out of your changing bag, and this is what you've got. This cassette is ready to load into any camera that accepts these 70mm cassettes. Again, I used a centered 65mm spool. That's what you would use for Mercury cameras, large format cameras, etc. But if I were loading, for instance, a Hasselblad camera, I would have used an offset spool, and that's all explained in the instruction guide. What you can do then is, if you have, I highly recommend, even though this is light tight, it is safe to load and store, I highly recommend you store it in a canister, a cassette canister. Kodak did make some big circular ones originally. They're hard to find now. Mercury makes one that is a little more space saving. What you do is you just bend this film a little bit to the side and pop it down in there, pop the top on it, and now you have something that's far more protected from light, protected from dings, bangs, scratches, etc. This you can throw in your bag, or you can put it in a Ziploc bag and put it in the refrigerator to store your film. I recommend always using a cassette canister like this when your film is not loaded in a camera back. So that's it. This is ready to shoot. One thing I will show you though is one extra bonus is some folks, if you like to add leader. Now what's going to happen here is this is all that's been exposed to light so far, but when you load the back, because this is a daylight spool, you can load any back in daylight. I would recommend subdued light, but nonetheless it can be exposed to light as you load, and it will expose a certain amount of the film that you pull around and load into your camera. If you want to minimize the amount of film that has been exposed to light, you can add leader. So that's the last thing I'm going to show you. Again, this is optional, but you can do this for 65mm or 70mm film. And if you have a Mercury cassette splicer, and that's what this is. So a cassette splicer allows you to take a cassette, you pop it in the left side like that, so that it's feeding down at the bottom, and then you take a piece of leader. And the leader, you could use any piece of film, but what I recommend is a section of film that has been developed previously. All right, and what you do is you just feed that through the right side. This is a weighted set, a weight, and you pull it up, feed your film in, and drop it down. And you're going to load these, and you can do this in the daylight because again, this is all the film you're exposing. You want it to be under 2 inches here. And what you do is you load these up centered on the little kind of white line there until the films are barely touching. If you have a really bad cut here, you can straighten it out. Just get the scissors in there and make it straighter, optionally. And then you just use a piece of Scotch magic tape. Once these two are lined up, you just drop that tape right in over the film. And at that point, you can lift this and pull it out of there. So, and you fold your tape around, and again, there might be a gap if your film wasn't totally straight. Now it's straight. That's what the splicer does, is holds your film straight for you. And if you have anything on the back, you might want to add another little piece of tape on the back side because you don't want any stickiness coming through the tape. Okay? Once you've done this, you just you roll this up, and so you get your little rewinder, and you can roll it up into the cassette itself, right? And then that's for storage. If you're ready to load it right away, you don't need to roll it in. It's basically you've got your leader now to be loaded into your back. You load it and you're done. That's it. Happy shooting.